After losing his son in an accident, a lonely millionaire clings to grief and solitude as his only routine. But everything changes when a stranger child tells him, "You can be my daddy if you want." That moment sparks an emotional and legal battle where love, greed, and secrets from the past intertwine. In the end, he will discover that rebuilding a family may be the greatest legacy one can leave behind. The fine May rain fell over New York City like a grey veil covering the entire metropolis. Robert Miller watched the drops trickle down the window of his office on the 22nd floor of a commercial building on Park Avenue. His fingers drummed on the arm of his wheelchair, an automatic movement he no longer even noticed himself making. Down below, life followed its frantic rhythm. Cars, people, business, dreams, tragedies. Everything continued, indifferent to the weight he carried in his chest. It had been 2 years, 3 months, and 15 days since the accident. Robert knew exactly how many. Days had passed because every morning upon waking, it was as if a voice in his head marked another number in that cruel count. 2 years, 3 months, and 15 days since a collision on the FDR Drive transformed his life into something he barely recognized. His son Liam was only 17. He was smart, funny, passionate about music and soccer. He had just gotten into college for engineering, his whole life ahead of him. And then, in a matter of seconds, everything was extinguished. Robert was also in the car that day. He was driving. The memory of the impact still visited his dreams, or rather his nightmares. The sound of twisting metal, the smell of smoke, the screams, the silence after. When he woke up in the hospital days later, he discovered that his son had not survived, and that his legs would never work the same way again. The wheelchair became a part of him, a physical extension of a paralysis that was much more emotional than physical. In the first few months, Robert barely left his bed. His wife, Mary Ann, tried everything. She was also devastated, but she tried to maintain some structure, some normality. But the pain was too great, too heavy. 6 months after the accident, she asked for a separation. Not because she didn't love him, she said through tears, but because she could no longer live in that house full of ghosts, in that marriage that had turned into a permanent wake. Robert didn't have the strength to fight. He signed the papers, divided their assets, and she moved into her sister's apartment on the Upper West Side. They still talked from time to time, brief and painful encounters where they tried to pretend they were okay. But both knew the wound would never fully close. Alone in his mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, Robert threw himself into his work. The company he had built over 3 decades continued to run, now almost on autopilot. He had competent partners, efficient directors, and his presence was more symbolic than necessary. But work was the only thing that made time pass. It was the only thing that kept his mind from plunging completely into the abyss. From 7 in the morning until 9 at night, he was in meetings, analyzing reports, closing deals. The fortune he had accumulated over the years, once a source of pride, was now just numbers in a bank account. He could buy anything, travel anywhere, but none of it made the slightest bit of sense. There was, however, one ritual that Robert maintained with an almost religious rigidity. Every Friday afternoon, he would leave the office, get into the adapted van that his driver, Mr. Reynolds, drove, and go to Woodlawn Cemetery. It was a beautiful place, if you can call a cemetery beautiful. Leafy trees, well-kept paths, a silence that contrasted with the incessant noise of the city. There in the family mausoleum lay Liam. Robert would spend hours there, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking softly, telling him about the week, about trivial work matters, about how much he missed him. On that Friday in May, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast. Robert arrived at the cemetery around 3 in the afternoon. Mr. Reynolds helped him out of the van, and he proceeded alone along the stone path to the grave. He carried a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, Liam's favorite flowers. Upon arriving, he arranged the flowers in the bronze vase, cleaned some dry leaves that had fallen on the headstone, and sat there, in silence. Time always seemed different in that place. Minutes stretched into hours, and Robert allowed himself to feel everything he repressed during the week. The longing, the guilt, the anger, the emptiness. He closed his eyes and let the tears come, something he rarely did anywhere else. It was then that he heard voices, children's voices. Robert opened his eyes and saw, a few feet away, a group of children walking in a line, accompanied by two adult women. They wore simple uniforms, all the same color, and seemed to be on some kind of educational outing. One of the women, a lady with grey hair and a stern expression, was speaking in a low voice about respect and silence in places like this. The children, some very young, others a bit older, followed obediently, but with that natural curiosity of childhood. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. Seeing children always hurt. Liam never got to have children, never had the chance to grow up, to live through all those stages that those children still had ahead of them. He looked away, trying to return to his intimacy with his son's grave, but something made him stop. One of the children had separated from the group. She was a little girl, must have been about 7, with brown hair in 2 braids and big, curious eyes. She had seen Robert, and instead of continuing with the others, she started walking towards him. Robert stood still, not knowing how to react. The girl stopped a few steps away, observing him with an intensity that seemed disproportionate for someone so young. "Why are you crying, mister?" she asked, with a soft and direct voice. Robert quickly wiped the tears with the back of his hand, a reflex of trying to appear stronger than he felt. "I'm visiting someone very important," he answered, his voice still choked with emotion. The girl looked at the headstone and then back at him. "He's your son," she stated, not asked. Robert nodded, unable to speak at that moment. The girl was silent for a few moments, as if thinking, and then said something he never would have expected to hear. "I don't have a mommy or a daddy. They went away. But if you want, you can be my daddy." The world stopped. Robert felt as if all the air had been knocked out of his lungs. Those words, spoken with such pure innocence, so free of any calculation or malice, struck something deep inside him. Before he could think, before he could process, he extended his arms, and the girl, without hesitation, came to him. Robert hugged her, and she hugged him back, with that disproportionate strength that children have, as if she wanted to comfort this strange man who was crying in front of a grave. For a moment, everything was silence and warmth. Robert felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't happiness, not exactly, but it was something like hope, a breath of life in the midst of so much emptiness. The moment was brutally interrupted by a loud, irritated voice. "Sophia! What are you doing?" the grey-haired woman shouted, running towards them. "Get away from there immediately!" The girl pulled away from the hug, startled by the caregiver's tone. Robert raised his hand, trying to calm the situation. "It's nothing. She just came to talk to me," he said, his voice still trembling. The woman, who Robert would later find out was named Vera, looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and anger. "We don't allow strangers to approach our children," she said curtly. The girl began to protest. "He didn't do anything wrong, Miss Vera. He was just sad." Vera ignored the girl's defense and pulled her by the arm, leading her back to the group. Before walking away completely, the girl looked back and gave a small wave to Robert. He waved back, still stunned by what had just happened. The children and the caregivers disappeared among the cemetery paths, and Robert was alone again. But something had changed. That brief encounter, that naive and disarming offer, had planted something inside him. A small, almost imperceptible seed, but one that was beginning to sprout. He stayed there for a few more minutes, talking softly to Liam. He told him about the little girl, about what she had said, about how it had moved him. And then, for the first time in a long time, Robert smiled. A sad smile, heavy with longing, but a true smile. When he returned to the van, Mr. Reynolds noticed something different. "Are you all right, Dr. Miller?" he asked, concerned. "I am, Reynolds," Robert replied. "I am." And then, before they could leave the cemetery, he asked Reynolds to wait a moment. Using his phone, Robert did a quick search. Orphanage, Lower Manhattan, NYC. Several results appeared. He didn't know exactly which place those children came from, but something inside him, a force he didn't know the origin of, told him he had to find out. In the following days, Robert couldn't get that little girl out of his head. He tried to return to his routine, to the meetings, the reports, but his mind was elsewhere. He found himself thinking about that hug, about that small voice saying he could be her father, and every time he thought about it, he felt a pang in his chest. It was pain, but it was also something else. It was a calling. The following Monday, Robert instructed his secretary, Claire, to discreetly investigate the orphanages in the area. He didn't give many details, just said he was interested in making a donation. Claire, who had worked with him for 15 years and knew his story, was surprised but didn't question him. She returned at the end of the day with a list of 5 institutions. Robert asked for the addresses of all of them. On Wednesday, he decided to act. He asked Reynolds to take him to the first address on the list, an orphanage in Brooklyn Heights. When they arrived, Robert observed the building from the outside. It was old but well-maintained, with a yellow facade and a simple sign at the entrance. But something told him this wasn't it. They moved on to the second, then the third. At the 4th orphanage, located in Soho, Robert felt he had found the right place. It was a large 2-story building with a garden in front and high gates. There were children playing in the yard, and he recognized the uniform they were wearing. It was the same as the one the girl from the cemetery wore. Robert took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and asked Reynolds to help him out of the van. He approached the gate and rang the bell. A staff member came to answer, a young woman with a kind look, wearing a blue apron and a name tag that read, Amanda. "Can I help you?" she asked, leaning down slightly to be at his eye level. "I'd like to speak with the director of the orphanage," Robert said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm interested in making a donation." Amanda seemed surprised but nodded with a genuine smile. "One moment, please." She disappeared for a few minutes, and Robert took the opportunity to observe the place. The front garden had some flowers, but the grass was patchy, and there were broken toys leaning against a corner. The paint on the facade was peeling, and the windows, though clean, had old rusty bars. It was a place that clearly needed more resources. Amanda returned with an even wider smile. "Director Thompson will see you. Please come in." Robert was led down a narrow hallway to a room on the first floor. The room was functional but had an air of trying to impress. There were diplomas on the wall, photos from charity events, and a dark wooden desk. Behind the desk, sitting in a leather chair, was Marcia Thompson. She was around 50, with dyed blonde hair, flawless makeup, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Miller," she said, standing up and extending her hand. "It's an honor to have you. I've heard a lot about you and your company." Robert shook her hand, surprised that she knew who he was. She gestured to a chair, but he was already in his wheelchair, so she just returned to her seat. "And what brings such an important businessman to our humble orphanage?" she asked, her tone one of forced cordiality. Robert decided to be direct. "I came here because I'd like to help. I was at Woodlawn Cemetery last week and saw a group of children from here. I was touched by their situation and thought about making a contribution." Marcia smiled, but there was something calculating in that smile. "What a generous gesture, Mr. Miller. We are always in need of donations. I run this home with great sacrifice, and any help is welcome." She picked up a folder from her desk. "I can prepare an official receipt for you, and of course, your name will be mentioned at our appreciation events." Robert hesitated. "It's not just that," he said. "I would also like, if possible, to visit the children, to get to know them, spend some time with them." Marcia's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Visit," she repeated, as if processing the idea. "Well, that's a bit unusual. We have very strict rules about strangers interacting with our children, you must understand." "I understand perfectly," Robert said, maintaining his calm. "But I'm not just any stranger. I'm willing to make a substantial donation, and in return I would just like to be able to visit from time to time, always under supervision, of course." Marcia was silent for a moment, clearly weighing her options. "And how much exactly are you considering donating?" she asked, her voice now more interested. Robert mentioned a figure. It wasn't a fortune to him, but it was enough to get any institution's attention. Marcia's eyes lit up. "Well," she said, "perhaps we can make an exception. A supervised visit, nothing too long, and as long as it's scheduled in advance." "Perfect," Robert agreed. "And I'd like to visit today, if possible." Marcia seemed caught off guard, but nodded. "Of course. I'll have someone escort you to the recreation room. The children should be finishing their lessons now." Robert was led by Amanda to a large room on the second floor. The recreation room was spacious, but had an air of neglect. There were toys scattered on the floor, some broken, others without batteries. There were shelves with books, but many were old and had torn pages. The walls had children's drawings taped up, some already yellowed with age. Several children were running and playing, their voices echoing through the space. There were boys playing with a deflated ball, girls playing with dolls missing arms, and a group sitting on the floor putting together a puzzle with missing pieces. And then he saw her. The girl from the cemetery was sitting in a corner near the window, drawing something in an old notebook. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window and illuminated her brown hair. When she looked up and saw him, her whole face lit up with a smile that seemed capable of illuminating the entire room. "You," she said, dropping her pencil and notebook and jumping up. "You came." She ran to him with quick steps and stopped right in front of his wheelchair, her big, bright eyes fixed on his. Robert felt a lump in his throat, an emotion so strong it almost suffocated him. "I did," he managed to say, his voice huskier than he intended. He looked around, noticing that some of the other children had stopped playing to watch him with curiosity. "What's your name?" he asked, turning, his attention back to the girl. "Sophia," she replied, smiling. "Sophia Marie Smith. And yours?" "Robert Miller. It's a pleasure to truly meet you, Sophia." "Sophia, you remember Mr. Miller?" Amanda intervened gently, staying close to supervise the interaction. "He's come for a visit. Be polite, okay?" Sophia nodded, but her eyes never left Robert's face. "You came to see me?" she asked, with a mixture of hope and shyness. "I did," Robert confirmed, feeling something shift inside his chest. "I didn't forget what you told me, and I thought maybe we could talk a little more." Sophia smiled, even wider, and then, with the naturalness of children, began to tell him about her life at the orphanage. She talked about the classes she had in the morning with her teacher, Helen, who was nice but sometimes very strict. She told him about her bed in the dormitory, which she shared with 5 other girls, and how they sometimes stayed up late talking. She talked about the food, which wasn't very good, but she always ate everything because she had learned not to waste. And she talked about her drawings, her passion. She loved to draw flowers, she said, because flowers were pretty and smelled nice and made people happy. Robert listened to her with rapt attention, fascinated by the way she expressed herself. Sophia was articulate, intelligent, and had a way of speaking that seemed much more mature than her 7 years suggested. There was a wisdom in her eyes, an understanding of the world that only comes from having gone through difficult things, and Robert recognized it because he carried that same look himself. "Can I see your drawings?" Robert asked. Sophia ran back to the corner where she had been, grabbed the notebook and returned. She opened the pages and began to show him. There were drawings of flowers, of trees, of houses with gardens, of smiling families. And there was one particular drawing that caught Robert's eye. It was of a little girl holding the hand of a tall man. They were both smiling, and above them was a big yellow sun. "Is this you?" Robert asked, pointing to the girl in the drawing. Sophia nodded. "And this here," she pointed to the man, "is the daddy I'm going to have one day." Robert felt his eyes sting. He looked at Sophia and saw in her something he hadn't seen in himself for a long time. Hope. Despite everything she had been through, having lost her parents, living in an orphanage, she still had hope. She still believed that one day she would have a family. "It's a very beautiful drawing, Sophia," Robert said, his voice trembling. "Your daddy will be very lucky to have you." Sophia looked at him for a long moment, and then said with a seriousness that contrasted with her age, "You can be him if you want. I like you. You're nice." Robert didn't know what to say. Robert just extended his hand, and Sophia took it. They stayed like that for a few minutes in silence while Amanda watched with a soft smile on her face. When the visit ended, half an hour later, Robert said goodbye, promising to return. Sophia made him pinky promise, extending her little finger to make that childish gesture. Robert linked his pinky with hers and promised, "I'll be back, Sophia. You can count on it." And he did come back. The following week, Robert showed up again, this time bringing a box full of new colored pencils, drawing pads, and children's books. He didn't bring them just for Sophia, but for all the children in the recreation room. When he handed out the gifts, the children exploded in shouts of joy. Many of them had never had new colored pencils, always using the old, worn-out ones the orphanage provided. Robert felt a deep satisfaction seeing those happy little faces. On his third visit, he brought board games. On the fourth, he brought storybooks and spent a full hour reading to a group of children who sat around him, completely fascinated. On the fifth visit, he brought paints and easels and spent the afternoon teaching the children to paint. Gradually, the other children began to approach him, asking for stories, showing him their drawings, wanting to play. There was a boy named Peter who always wanted to play chess with him. There was a girl named Anne who liked to tell jokes. There was little Gabriel, only 4 years old, who always jumped into his lap asking to be held. And Robert, who had previously lived in a cocoon of pain and loneliness, began to feel that there was a purpose again. For the first time since the accident, he woke up in the morning wanting to get out of bed, with something to look forward to. The days he visited the orphanage became the most important days of the week. He planned in advance what he would bring, what he would do with the children, how he could help. But not everything was rosy. Marcia began to watch him more closely. Robert noticed that whenever he arrived, she was nearby, observing from a distance, and there was something in her eyes, a suspicion, perhaps even fear. Robert couldn't quite understand why. He was just trying to help, just trying to bring a little joy to those children. But Marcia seemed to see him as a threat. One afternoon, after one of his visits, Robert asked Amanda about Sophia. He wanted to know more about her story, about how she had ended up there. Amanda hesitated, looking around to make sure no one was listening, and then told him in a low voice. Sophia had arrived at the orphanage 3 years ago, along with an older sister. Their parents had died in an accident, and the girls had no other relatives. The sister Isabella had stayed there for a while but was later adopted by a family. Sophia stayed, waiting for her turn, but adoptions were rare, especially for older children. Robert's heart ached. Sophia had a sister she had been separated from. He thought of Liam, of how terrible it would have been if he had been separated from his son. And there was Sophia, a girl of only 7, having to deal not only with the loss of her parents, but also with the separation from her sister. He went home that night thinking about it all, and for the first time in a long time, Robert began to think about the future, not just about surviving the next day, but about truly living, about doing something that mattered, about creating something new from the pain. The answer would come very soon, and it would change everything. But not everything was rosy. Marcia began to watch him more closely, and Robert realized that she didn't like the closeness he was creating with the children. There was something in her eyes, a suspicion, perhaps even fear, and Robert couldn't quite understand why. The answer would come very soon, and it would change everything. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing, 3 months had passed since Robert's first visit to the orphanage, 3 months that transformed not only his routine, but his way of looking at life. He still went to the cemetery every Friday to visit Liam, but now those visits had a different tone. It was no longer just pain and guilt, it was also gratitude. Gratitude for having had that wonderful son, even if for such a short time, and gratitude for having found Sophia, that little girl who, without knowing it, had opened a door he thought was locked forever. His visits to the orphanage had become more frequent. From once a week they became twice, sometimes 3 times. Robert began to see it not as charity, but as an essential part of his life. He brought school supplies, toys, new clothes. He renovated the recreation room, installed new shelves, bought a large television, brought colorful cushions and soft rugs. The room, which once looked like an abandoned warehouse, now had life, color, joy. The children adored him. Whenever he arrived, he was greeted with excited shouts and hugs. Little Gabriel always ran to be the first to greet him. Anne told him her new jokes. Peter challenged him to a game of chess. And Sophia, his Sophia, always stayed close, as if she feared he might disappear if she took her eyes off him for too long. Robert had also started to get to know the staff better. Amanda, who had been the first to welcome him, was sweet and dedicated, but he noticed she was always tired, always overworked. There was Ms. Vera, the stern caregiver he had met at the cemetery, who never seemed to like him very much. There was also the teacher Helen, a middle-aged woman who taught the children in a makeshift space on the ground floor. And there was Marcia, the director, whom Robert increasingly distrusted. Marcia was always polite to him, always maintained that professional smile, but Robert felt something was wrong. He noticed little things, the way she always changed the subject when he asked about the orphanage's finances, the way she became annoyed when he spent too much time with the children, the looks she exchanged with Miss Vera when she thought no one was watching, and there was also the general state of the place. Despite the substantial donations Robert had made, the orphanage continued to have basic problems. The paint was still peeling, there were leaks in the ceiling of the girls' dormitory, the food the children received was too basic, almost insufficient. One morning Robert was in his office when Claire entered with a worried expression. "Dr. Miller, there's a journalist in reception. He wants to talk to you about the orphanage." Robert frowned. A journalist? How did a journalist find out? "Send him in, Claire." The journalist was a young man, probably in his 30s, with disheveled hair and a notepad in his hand. He introduced himself as Frank Andrews from the New York Times. "Mr. Miller, I started hearing rumors about your generosity with an orphanage in Soho. I'd like to do a story about it. I think it's an inspiring story." Robert hesitated. "I don't do this for media attention, Frank. I do it because I believe it's the right thing to do." Frank nodded. "I understand perfectly. But stories like yours can inspire other people to help too. And besides, it would be good publicity for the orphanage. They could receive more donations." Robert thought for a moment. There was logic in what the journalist was saying. If the story was published, maybe more people would be interested in helping. The orphanage clearly needed more resources. "All right," he agreed. "But I want to approve the article before it's published." Frank smiled. "Of course, Mr. Miller. I'll schedule a visit to the orphanage to take some photos and talk to the children if you'll allow it." He allowed it. And a week later, the article was published. It was a full page, with photos of Robert with the children, photos of the renovated recreation room, and an interview where he spoke about the importance of helping those in need. The headline read, "Millionaire Businessman Finds Purpose After Personal Tragedy by Helping Orphaned Children." The reaction was immediate. The company's phone didn't stop ringing. Other newspapers wanted interviews. Television shows wanted to invite him on. And donations started pouring in for the orphanage from ordinary people who had been touched by the story. Robert was pleased. His goal had been achieved. The orphanage was receiving more attention, more resources, but the exposure also brought unwanted consequences. 2 days after the article was published, Robert received a visit from his lawyer, Oliver Fitzgerald. Oliver had worked for the Miller family for over 20 years. He was a meticulous man, always in an impeccable suit and with a rigid posture. "Robert, we need to talk," he said upon entering the office, without even waiting to be invited to sit. Robert raised his eyebrows. "About what, Oliver?" "About this orphanage story. It's causing a stir, and not the good kind." Robert leaned forward in his chair. "Explain." Oliver opened his briefcase and took out some papers. "Your cousins, Gregory and Renee, have contacted me. They're worried about you." "Worried?" Robert repeated, skeptical. "They've never been worried about me before." Oliver ignored the comment. "They think you might be being manipulated, that these people from the orphanage might be taking advantage of your emotional state. And frankly, Robert, I agree with them." Robert felt anger rise within him. "My emotional state? And what state would that be, Oliver? You went through a tragedy. You lost your son, your wife. You're vulnerable. And these people know it. They saw an opportunity and they're using you." Robert slammed his hand on the desk, making Oliver jump slightly. "You don't know what you're talking about. Those children aren't using me. I'm the one who decided to help them, of my own free will." Oliver sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Robert, your cousins are considering petitioning for a competency hearing. They think you may not be in a condition to make important financial decisions." Robert was silent for a long moment, processing what he had just heard. "A competency hearing. They want to have me declared incompetent. It's a protective measure, Robert. For your own good. Robert gave a bitter laugh. Protection. They want to get their hands on my fortune. They always have. And now they see an opportunity. Oliver didn't deny it. He adjusted his glasses and said cautiously, "Be that as it may, I advise you to slow down with these visits to the orphanage, at least until things calm down." Robert looked directly into the lawyer's eyes. "I'm not going to do that. And if my cousins want to have me declared incompetent, let them try. They'll lose." Oliver gathered his papers and stood up. "I hope you're right, Robert, because if this goes to court, it's going to be an ugly battle." After Oliver left, Robert remained alone, in his office, feeling the weight of the situation. He had expected that helping the orphanage might bring complications, but he hadn't imagined they would come from his own family. Gregory and Renee were the children of his father's younger brother, who had passed away years ago. They had always been envious of the fortune Robert built, always felt they deserved a larger share of the family inheritance. And now they saw a chance to get what they wanted. Robert took a deep breath and picked up the phone. He called Claire and asked her to schedule a meeting with his accountant and another lawyer, someone outside of Oliver's sphere. He needed to protect himself, but he also needed to protect the children, because now he knew this had become a war, and he had no intention of losing. Meanwhile, at the orphanage, things were also getting tense. The newspaper article had brought not just positive attention. The Regional Child Protective Services had received anonymous tips about a man who was spending too much time with orphaned children. The tips insinuated that there was something inappropriate about the relationship. Robert was called in for questioning. The meeting at Child Protective Services was embarrassing and painful. 3 social workers received him in a small cold room with posters about children's rights on the walls. They asked direct questions, some even offensive. Why would a single man, with no history of volunteer work, suddenly become so interested in orphaned children? Was he not using this as a way to alleviate his own guilt over his son's death? Was he aware of how this behavior could be interpreted? Robert answered all the questions patiently, explaining his motivations, showing documents of the donations, offering references. He made it clear that all his visits were supervised, that he was never alone with any child, that his only interest was to help. In the end, the social workers said they would investigate, but for now he could continue his visits as long as they remained supervised. Robert left there exhausted and upset. Someone was trying to sabotage his work, and he had a strong suspicion who it was. That same night, Robert made a decision. He needed to know exactly what was happening at the orphanage. The numbers didn't add up. There were too many strange things. He called an old acquaintance, Mark Andrews, a private investigator he had used a few times for corporate matters. "Mark, I need you to investigate someone for me," Robert said. Mark, a man with a deep voice and experience in difficult cases, agreed immediately. "Give me the details." Robert told him about Marcia, about his suspicions, about the state of the orphanage despite his donations. Mark took notes and promised to start the next morning. "I'll find out what's going on there, Robert. You can count on it." While the investigation began, Robert continued his visits to the orphanage, but now with more attentive eyes. He observed everything, every detail, every conversation, every movement, and he began to notice things that had previously gone unnoticed. Marcia always wore expensive clothes, showy jewelry, drove an imported car. For someone who claimed to live on a modest salary running an orphanage, it didn't make sense. Ms. Vera also seemed to be living beyond her means, and there were whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when he approached. One afternoon, while playing with the children in the yard, Robert heard Sophia call out to him urgently, "Uncle Robert, come see." He approached and saw that she was pointing at the building. Sophia had started calling him uncle a few weeks ago, and although he preferred to be called just Robert, he didn't have the heart to correct her. "What is it, Sophia?" "There's a hole in the ceiling of our room," she said. "When it rains, the water falls on my bed." Robert felt anger grow. "I showed Miss Marcia," Sophia continued, "but she said there's no money to fix it." No money. Robert had donated enough to renovate the entire orphanage 3 times over. "I'll take care of this, Sophia, I promise." He went straight to find Marcia, who was in her office. "Marcia, I need to talk to you," he said, entering without knocking. She looked up from the papers on her desk, clearly annoyed by the intrusion. "Mr. Miller, I was busy. The children are sleeping in rooms with leaks. Why hasn't this been fixed yet?" Marcia sighed, as if explaining something obvious to a very slow person. "Because renovations are expensive, Mr. Miller. The resources you donate go to food, education, staff. It doesn't cover everything. I've donated over $50,000 in the last 3 months, Marcia. That should be more than enough to fix a ceiling." Marcia's face turned red. "You have no idea how difficult it is to run a place like this. There are costs you can't even imagine. And frankly, I don't have to account for every penny I spend." Robert stared at her. "Actually, you do. Because that money was donated to help the children, not to finance your lifestyle." Marcia stood up, furious. "How dare you? I dedicate my life to these children. You showed up here a few months ago wanting to play the Good Samaritan, and now you think you can question me." Robert remained calm. "I want to see the orphanage's financial records, all of them." "That's confidential. Then I'll ask the district attorney's office to investigate. I'm sure they'll want to see them too." Marcia turned pale. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm demanding transparency. If you have nothing to hide, there's no problem in showing the records." Marcia took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "I'll think about it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Robert left the office knowing he had just declared war. Marcia wasn't going to hand over the records voluntarily, but he didn't need them anymore. Mark was investigating, and Robert was sure he would soon have the answers he was looking for. In the following days, the tension at the orphanage was palpable. Marcia barely spoke to Robert, and Miss Vera watched him with a hostile gaze whenever he appeared. But the other staff members, especially Amanda and the teacher Helen, seemed relieved that someone was finally questioning the administration. One afternoon, while Robert was reading a story to a group of children, Amanda approached discreetly and whispered, "Can I talk to you later in private? It's important." Robert nodded. When he finished the story and the children went for their snack, he met Amanda in an isolated corner of the yard. "What is it, Amanda?" Amanda looked around, making sure no one was listening. "I know you're investigating Director Marcia, and I want to help." Robert leaned forward. "What do you know?" "I know she's embezzling money. I've seen fake documents, altered receipts. She inflates purchase values and pockets the difference. And Ms. Vera helps her. They've been doing this for years." Robert felt a mix of anger and validation. "Do you have proof?" Amanda hesitated. "I have pictures of some documents. I took them with my phone when she wasn't looking. But I'm scared. If she finds out, I'll lose my job, and I need this job." Robert placed a hand on her shoulder. "Amanda, you're not going to lose anything. I'll protect you. And I'll make sure Marcia pays for what she's done." Amanda took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, I'll email you the photos tonight." That night, Robert received the photos and immediately forwarded them to Mark. With that evidence, plus what Mark had already uncovered, they would have enough material to expose Marcia. But Robert knew he had to act carefully. If Marcia found out she was being investigated, she could destroy evidence or even retaliate against the children. As he planned his next steps, Robert received an unexpected call. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "Hello," he answered. "Mr. Miller." The voice on the other end was female, young, hesitant. "My name is Isabella Smith. I'm Sophia's sister." Robert's heart raced. Isabella, the sister who had been separated from Sophia. "How did you get my number?" "I saw the article in the newspaper about you helping the orphanage, and I recognized my sister in the photos. I need to talk to you." Robert immediately agreed to meet her. They arranged for the next day at a coffee shop in Greenwich Village. Robert spent the entire night thinking about that phone call. Isabella had returned, and that would change everything. The next day, Robert arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. He ordered a coffee and sat near the window, watching people pass by on the sidewalk. When Isabella arrived, he recognized her immediately. She was 16, but looked older. She was tall, thin, with the same big eyes as Sophia. She wore jeans, and a simple blouse and carried a backpack. "Mr. Miller?" she said, approaching timidly. Robert motioned for her to sit. "Please call me Robert. Would you like something? Coffee? Juice?" Isabella ordered a hot chocolate and was silent for a few moments, clearly nervous. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," she finally said. "Of course. You said you're Sophia's sister. I didn't know she had a sister until a few weeks ago." Isabella nodded, her eyes welling up. "We were separated 3 years ago. After our parents passed away, we went to the orphanage, but I was 13 and a family adopted me. They didn't want to adopt Sophia too. They said one child was enough." Robert felt a pang of anger. How could someone separate sisters like that? "And why didn't you get in touch sooner?" "I tried, but the family that adopted me wouldn't let me. They're controlling, they want me to forget my past, to pretend I was always their daughter. But I never forgot Sophia. Never." Robert leaned forward. "And now? Why now?" Isabella took a deep breath. "Because I saw the article in the newspaper. I saw the picture of my sister smiling, and I realized she's okay, that someone is taking care of her, and I want to be a part of that. I want my sister back." Robert understood the pain in her voice. He too had lost someone he loved. He knew what that emptiness was like. "I understand, Isabella, but you need to know that the situation is complicated. I'm not Sophia's father. I just help her, like I help the other children." "But you could adopt her, right? I saw in the news that you're rich, that you have resources. You could give her a family." Robert hesitated. "I've thought about it. But it's not that simple. And besides, now that you've appeared, maybe you're the best person to take care of her. Your sisters." Isabella shook her head. "I'm 16. I can't have custody of her, at least not yet. But if you adopted her, I could visit her, be part of her life again." Robert was silent, processing it all. The situation was getting more complex by the minute. He had relatives trying to declare him incompetent, a corrupt orphanage to expose, Child Protective Services investigating his motives, and now a sister who wanted to reconnect with Sophia. It was too much, too fast. But when he looked at Isabella, he saw the same hope he saw in Sophia's eyes, and he knew he couldn't give up. "We'll figure this out together, Isabella. I promise I'll do everything I can to get you and Sophia back together again." Isabella smiled for the first time, a smile that lit up her entire face. "Thank you, Mr. Robert. Thank you so much." As he drove home that afternoon, Robert thought about everything that had happened in the last few months. His life had changed completely. He had found a purpose, but he had also found a battle he was determined to win. For Sophia, for Isabella, for all those children who deserved a chance at a better life. And he knew this was just the beginning. The rain returned to New York City on a grey August afternoon. Robert was in his office reviewing the documents Mark had compiled about Marcia when Claire ran in, her face pale and worried. "Dr. Miller, I just got a call from the orphanage. It's Sophia. She's in the hospital." The world stopped. Robert felt as if the floor had opened up beneath him. What happened?" Claire took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Amanda called. She said Sophia had a high fever last night, started vomiting and fainting. They called an ambulance, and she was taken to Mount Sinai Hospital. They're running tests now." Robert didn't wait for another word. He grabbed his phone and called Reynolds. "Come get me. Now. We're going to Mount Sinai." The drive to the hospital was torture. The New York traffic seemed even more chaotic on that rainy afternoon. Robert tried to stay calm, but his heart was pounding, his mind creating the worst-case scenarios. Sophia was a strong child, but she was also small and fragile, and he knew the orphanage didn't properly care for the children's health. How many times had he seen sick children go without proper treatment? How many times had Marcia claimed a lack of resources for doctor's appointments? When they finally arrived at the hospital, Robert went straight to the front desk. He identified himself and asked for information about Sophia Marie Smith. The receptionist checked the system and informed him she was in the pediatric unit on the 3rd floor. Robert wasted no time. He headed for the elevators went up, and when the doors opened, he saw Amanda sitting in a chair in the hallway, her face in her hands. "Amanda!" Robert called, approaching quickly. She looked up, her eyes red from crying. "Mr. Miller, thank God you're here. How is she? What did the doctors say?" Amanda wiped her tears. "She has a serious infection, pneumonia. The doctors said she's been like this for days, but no one at the orphanage noticed. Or if they did nothing." Robert felt anger swell inside him like a wave. Pneumonia? How does a child get pneumonia and no one notices? "Her room has that hole in the ceiling," Amanda said, her voice breaking. "Whenever it rained, the water would drip onto her bed. She was sleeping on wet sheets in the cold. And nobody did anything. I tried to talk to Marcia several times, but she always said she'd fix it and never did." Robert closed his eyes, trying to control the fury he felt. "Can I see her?" Amanda nodded. "She's sleeping, but the doctor said you can go in." Robert entered the room, and what he saw broke his heart. Sophia was lying in a hospital bed that looked far too big for her, connected to tubes and monitors. Her face, usually lively and rosy, was pale and sweaty. She was breathing with difficulty, each breath seeming like an effort. Robert approached slowly, took her small hand in his, and just stood there in silence, watching her. How much time passed he couldn't say. It could have been minutes or hours. But then Sophia slowly opened her eyes. When she saw Robert, a small smile formed on her lips. "Uncle Robert," she whispered, her voice weak. "I'm here, Sophia. You're going to be okay. I promise." "I'm cold," she said. Robert took an extra blanket that was folded on a chair and carefully covered her. "Better?" Sophia nodded, closing her eyes again. "You're not leaving, are you?" "I'm not. I'll stay here with you for as long as it takes." And he stayed. When night fell, Amanda had to return to the orphanage, but Robert remained there by Sophia's bedside. He called Claire and cancelled all his appointments for the week. Nothing else mattered but that little girl. The doctors came every few hours, checking her vital signs, adjusting her medication. The diagnosis was serious, but with proper treatment, Sophia would recover. Robert thanked God he had arrived in time, but he couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if she had stayed any longer in that cold, damp room. The next morning, while Sophia was still asleep, Robert received a visit from Mark Andrews. The investigator had a thick folder under his arm and a serious expression on his face. "Robert, we need to talk," he said, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Sophia. They stepped out into the hallway and Mark opened the folder. "What I've found is worse than we imagined," he began. "Marcia Thompson has been embezzling money from the orphanage for at least 5 years. She creates fake suppliers, inflates purchase values, pockets donations that should go to the children. I estimate she's diverted over $250,000 over the years." Robert's stomach churned. $250,000, while the children slept in leaky rooms and ate insufficient food. Mark continued. "And it's not just her. Ms. Vera, the caregiver, is also involved. She gets a percentage of the take in exchange for keeping the children quiet and not reporting the irregularities. And there's more. More." Robert could hardly believe there could be more. "The anonymous tips to Child Protective Services. Marcia made them. She got scared when you started asking questions, when you started getting too involved. She tried to push you away, to create a negative image of you so you would stop visiting the orphanage." Robert clenched his fists. "That woman is going to pay for everything she's done." Mark nodded. "I have enough evidence for a formal complaint to the district attorney's office. With the material Amanda provided and what I've managed to investigate, Marcia has no way out." "Then file the complaint, today." Mark put the papers away. "I will, but Robert, you need to be prepared. When this goes public, it's going to be a scandal. The media will cover it. They'll ask questions. They'll want to know how you got involved in all this." "I don't care. All I care about is making sure these children are protected." Mark squeezed his shoulder. "You're a good man, Robert. Sophia is lucky to have you." After Mark left, Robert returned to the room. Sophia was awake, looking out the window. "Uncle Robert," she called when she saw him enter. "I'm here, sweetie." "I had a dream," she said. "I dreamed I lived in a big house with a garden full of flowers, And you were there. And there was someone else too, a girl. She looked like you. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. That girl might be your sister, Isabella. She's here, Sophia. Your sister, she wants to see you. Sophia's eyes widened. Bella? My sister. She remembers me. She does. And she loves you very much. When you get better, I'll bring her to visit you. Sophia smiled, and for the first time, since she had arrived at the hospital, she seemed truly happy. I really want to see her. It's been so long. In the following days, Sophia began to improve. The antibiotics took effect, the fever went down, and she started smiling and talking normally again. Robert stayed there the whole time, only leaving to shower and change clothes. He slept in the armchair next to her bed, woke up when she woke up, told her stories to help her sleep. It was during one of these vigils that Robert received a call from Isabella. How is she? The teenager asked, her voice worried. Getting better. The doctors say she might be discharged in a few days. Can I visit her? I really want to see her. Robert hesitated. Isabella, before you come, I need to tell you something. I'm going to start the process to adopt Sophia, but that means we're going to face resistance, from the orphanage, maybe even from the authorities. It's going to be a battle, and if you want to be a part of this, to be a part of her life, you need to be prepared. Isabella didn't hesitate for a second. I'm prepared. I'll do whatever it takes for my sister. Then come see her. Isabella arrived at the hospital that same afternoon. When she entered the room and saw Sophia, the two sisters were silent for a long moment, just looking at each other. And then, as if a dam had broken, Isabella ran to the bed and hugged Sophia tightly, both of them crying. Sophia. My Sophia, Isabella repeated, kissing her younger sister's forehead. Bella, you came back. You really came back, Sophia said between sobs. Robert watched the reunion with tears in his eyes. There was the proof that true love, the love between sisters, couldn't be erased by time or distance. And he swore to himself that he would do everything in his power to keep those two together. But reality soon came knocking. 2 days later, while Sophia was still in the hospital, Robert received a court summons. His cousins Gregory and Renee had indeed filed a petition for conservatorship. They alleged that Robert was not in full mental capacity, that he was being manipulated, and that he needed a guardian to manage his assets. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from then. Robert took the summons to his new lawyer, Dr. Paul H. Stevens, one of the best family lawyers in New York. Paul read the document carefully and sighed. They're playing hardball, Robert. They claim you've had erratic behavior since your son's death, that you're donating excessive amounts, that you're getting involved with children in an inappropriate way. They're going to try to paint a picture of mental instability. And what can we do? Paul leaned forward. We're going to fight back. We'll show that you are perfectly sane, that your donations are conscious and well-intentioned, that your relationship with the children is appropriate and supervised. I'll need witnesses, medical documents, anything that can prove your sanity. Robert nodded. You'll have everything you need. But there was more. That same week, Mark's complaint against Marcia was accepted by the district attorney's office. An operation was carried out at the orphanage, documents were seized, and Marcia was removed from her position. The news spread like wildfire through the city. The newspapers ran headlines about the corruption scandal at the orphanage, and Robert's name was in all of them, not as a villain but as the man who had exposed the corruption. The fallout was enormous. Television shows wanted to interview him. Other orphanages contacted him asking for help. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, but Robert refused all interviews. He didn't want fame, he didn't want to be treated like a hero. He just wanted Sophia safe and well cared for. Sophia was discharged from the hospital a week after being admitted, but she couldn't go back to the orphanage, not with all the turmoil happening there. Robert, using his influence and resources, managed to get temporary authorization for Sophia to stay at a private shelter, a small, well-kept place, while the situation was resolved. And he visited every day along with Isabella. The conservatorship hearing arrived faster than Robert would have liked. He entered the courthouse with Paul by his side, wearing a discreet suit, his wheelchair impeccably clean. On the other side of the room were Gregory and Renee, accompanied by Oliver Fitzgerald and a lawyer specializing in conservatorship cases. They looked at Robert with that mix of false pity and poorly disguised greed. The judge, Judge Michael A. Lewis, was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a stern expression. He began the hearing by reading the petition. The cousins alleged that Robert had suffered a significant trauma, that his judgment was impaired, that he was making irrational financial decisions. Paul presented the defense. He brought in reports from 2 renowned psychiatrists who had evaluated Robert and concluded that he was in perfect mental health. He brought financial documents showing that the donations, though generous, did not compromise Robert's assets. He brought witnesses who spoke about his character, his dedication, his lucidity. Amanda was one of the witnesses. She took the stand and, in a firm voice, told how Robert had transformed the lives of the children at the orphanage, how he was careful, respectful, always supervised. She told about Marcia's corruption and how brave Robert had been to expose it. Isabella also testified. At just 16, she spoke with an impressive maturity about the love Robert showed for her sister, about how he had brought them back together, about how he was a good man who deserved to be respected, not put under a conservatorship. The cousins, in turn, tried to paint Robert as an unstable man, obsessed with children because he couldn't get over the death of his own son. They brought up the Child Protective Services tips, which had already been dismissed but still cast a shadow of doubt. The hearing lasted all day. When it finally ended, the judge said he would study the case and give his decision in a week. Robert left the courthouse exhausted, but relatively optimistic. Paul had done an excellent job and the witnesses had been convincing, but the wait would be torturous. That night, Robert went to visit Sophia at the shelter. She was in the garden, drawing in her notebook, with Isabella sitting beside her. When they saw Robert, they both smiled. "Uncle Robert," Sophia called, running to hug him. "How are you?" "Sweetie," he asked, kissing the top of her head. "Better. Bella told me stories about when we were little, about our parents." Robert looked at Isabella, who smiled sadly. "I thought it was important for her to remember," she said. "It was important," Robert agreed. And then, taking a deep breath, he decided to be honest with them. "Sophia, Isabella, I need to talk to you about something serious." The two paid close attention. Robert lowered himself in his chair to be at Sophia's eye level. "I want to adopt you, Sophia. I want you to be my daughter officially. And I want Isabella to be part of our family too. But for that to happen, we're going to have to fight. There are people who don't want this to happen. People who will try to separate us." Sophia squeezed his hand. "But we're going to stay together, right? You promised. And I'm going to keep my promise, but it's going to be hard. There will be hearings, judges, lawyers, and you both need to be strong." Isabella placed her hand on top of theirs. "We are strong, Uncle Robert, and we'll fight together." That night, lying in his bed, in the empty Greenwich mansion, Robert looked at the ceiling and thought about everything that had happened. 6 months ago, he was a broken man, living in the past, without hope. Now he had a reason to wake up every morning. He had Sophia, he had Isabella, he had a purpose. Yes, there were battles ahead. Yes, there were people trying to bring him down, but he was no longer alone. And that made all the difference. A week later, the judge's decision arrived. Robert was in his office when Paul called. "We won, Robert. The judge denied the petition. For conservatorship. He said you are fully competent, that your actions demonstrate lucidity and compassion, not instability." Robert felt a huge weight lift off his shoulders. "And what about my cousins?" "They'll have to pay the court costs." And the judge made it clear that any future attempts at a conservatorship would be viewed with great suspicion. Robert thanked him and hung up the phone. It was a victory, but he knew the war wasn't over yet. Because now came the hardest part of all, getting legal custody of Sophia, and for that he would have to face the system, the laws, and maybe even Isabella, who also had the right to fight for her sister. But as he looked out his office window, seeing the city stretch to the horizon, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Confidence. Confidence that no matter what came, he would be ready. For Sophia, for Isabella, for this new family that was being born from the rubble of pain, and he knew that Liam, wherever he was, would be proud. Autumn arrived in New York, bringing with it milder days and a sky that alternated between blue and grey. Robert was in his office when he received the official notification. The adoption petition had been accepted for evaluation, and the hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks from then. It would be the decisive moment, the point where everything would be defined. Sophia could finally have a family, or everything could fall apart. Paul Stevens was confident, but realistic. Robert, the adoption process isn't simple, especially in your case. You're a single man with a physical disability who has recently been through a tragedy. The judges will question your ability to raise a child alone. I won't be alone, Robert replied. I have Isabella, I have staff, I have a support network. Paul nodded. We'll use that to our advantage, but there's another issue we need to consider. Isabella. Robert frowned. What about Isabella? She's Sophia's biological sister. She has the right to petition for custody too, and she's already approached me to talk about it. Robert's stomach tightened. Isabella wants to fight me for custody. Not exactly. She wants to be part of the process. She wants to ensure she has a voice, that she can be part of her sister's life. But her adoptive family is pressuring her, saying she should try for full custody. Robert took a deep breath. The situation was getting more complex by the day. He knew Isabella loved Sophia, but he also knew she was only 16, under the guardianship of another family, and had no real means to raise her sister alone. But the blood tie carried a lot of weight in judicial decisions. I need to talk to her, Robert said. They arranged a meeting for the next day, in a park in Soho. It was a sunny Sunday, and the park was full of families, children playing, couples walking. Robert arrived, first, and waited near an artificial lake. When Isabella appeared, he noticed she looked different, more tense, older. Uncle Robert, she said, approaching. Isabella, thanks for coming. They were silent for a few moments, watching the ducks swim in the lake. It was Isabella who broke the silence. I know you want to adopt Sophia, and I understand why. You love her, you take care of her, you give her things I never could. Robert looked at her. But she's my sister, my only blood family, and I lost her once. I don't want to lose her again. Robert felt the pain in her voice and understood completely. Isabella, I don't want to take your sister from you. I never have. All I want is to give her a chance at a better life, and that includes having you in her life. Isabella wiped away a tear that ran down her face. The family that adopted me, they don't understand that. They want me to forget my past, to pretend I was always their daughter, and they're saying I should fight for custody of Sophia, that a sister is better than a stranger. Robert placed a hand on her shoulder. I'm not a stranger, Isabella, and you know that, but I understand your position. You're being pulled in two directions, by your adoptive family and by the love for your sister. Isabella nodded, sobbing. I don't know what to do. I don't want to fight with you, but I don't want to lose Sophia either. Robert thought for a long moment, and then he said something that had been on his mind for days. What if we didn't have to fight? What if there was a way for us to all be together? Isabella looked at him, confused. What do you mean? If I get custody of Sophia, you could live with us, or at least spend weekends, holidays. You would be part of the family. Sophia would have you. She would have me. We would all be together. Isabella was silent, processing the proposal. But what about my adoptive family? They'll never allow it. You're 16, Isabella. Soon you'll be an adult. And even now you have the right to choose where you want to be. If your adoptive family truly loves you, they'll understand and respect your decision. Isabella took a deep breath. I need to think, to talk to them. But Uncle Robert, I want you to know that I trust you, and I know you love Sophia as much as I do. Robert smiled. Then let's do this together. Let's go to the hearing not as adversaries but as a family, and we'll show the judge that Sophia will have not just a father, but also a sister who loves her. Isabella smiled for the first time, and they hugged. There, in that sunny park, An alliance was formed. An alliance based on the love for a 7-year-old girl who had stolen both their hearts. The weeks leading up to the hearing were intense. Robert prepared meticulously. Paul gathered witnesses, documents, psychological reports. They built a solid case showing that Robert had not only the financial, but also the emotional capacity to raise Sophia. Amanda agreed to testify again. The teacher Helen did too, and Isabella, after long conversations with her adoptive family, decided she would testify in favor of Robert, making it clear that she wanted to be part of her sister's life, but recognized that Robert was the best option for custody. Meanwhile, Sophia remained in the temporary shelter, visited daily by Robert and Isabella. She didn't fully understand everything that was happening, but she knew it was important. "Is Uncle Robert going to be my real daddy?" she would ask every time. "We're going to do everything we can to make that happen," Robert would always reply. But there was an obstacle Robert hadn't foreseen. Isabella's adoptive family, the Caldwells, decided to enter the process as well. They claimed that, as Isabella's legal guardians, they had the right to an opinion on Sophia's future. Furthermore, they proposed that they adopt Sophia themselves, reuniting the two sisters in their home. At first glance, it seemed like a reasonable solution. Two sisters reunited in a structured family. But Robert knew the truth. The Caldwells didn't want Sophia out of love. They wanted control. And behind them, Robert discovered through Mark, were his cousins. Gregory and Renee, after losing the conservatorship case, had found another way to attack Robert. They had approached the Caldwells, offered legal and financial support, with the promise that if they managed to prevent Robert's adoption, they would receive a generous compensation. It was a conspiracy, and Robert had proof. Mark had intercepted emails between Gregory and the Caldwells' lawyer, explicit messages about how to use Isabella and Sophia as pawns to harm Robert. Paul was euphoric when he saw the evidence. "This changes everything, Robert. We're going to expose this conspiracy at the hearing. We'll show that the Caldwells have no genuine interest in the girls, only in hurting you." The day of the hearing arrived on a cloudy September morning. The courthouse was packed, with journalists outside, curious onlookers trying to get in. The story had gone national. The millionaire businessman fighting to adopt the orphan girl. The teenage sister torn between two families. The corruption exposed. It had all become a headline. Robert entered the courtroom with Paul by his side, wearing a dark suit and a navy blue tie. His wheelchair was positioned next to the defense table. On the other side of the room were the Caldwells, a middle-aged couple with austere expressions, accompanied by Isabella, who looked deeply uncomfortable. And at another table, as an interested party, was the representative from the district attorney's office and the social worker responsible for Sophia's case. The judge presiding over the hearing was Judge Beatrice Nolan, a woman in her early 50s, known for her strictness and impartiality. She entered the room, and everyone rose. The hearing began. Paul presented Robert's case first. He spoke of the tragedy Robert had suffered, of how Sophia had brought light back into his life, of the donations, the renovations, the genuine care. He presented reports showing that Robert was in perfect mental health, that he had the financial and emotional structure to raise a child. He presented the plans for adapting the mansion to accommodate Sophia, with a decorated room, a play area, everything designed for her. The witnesses were called. Amanda spoke of the transformation Robert had brought to the orphanage, of his character. The teacher Helen spoke of how Sophia had blossomed in recent months, of how she spoke of Robert with love and admiration. And then it was Isabella's turn. The teenager took the stand with trembling hands. The judge looked at her kindly. "Isabella, you are Sophia's sister. I would like you to tell us what you think about this adoption." Isabella took a deep breath and began to speak. "I love my sister more than anything in the world. When our parents passed away, Sophia was all I had left. And when I was adopted and she wasn't, it felt like my heart had been ripped out. I spent 3 years afraid I would never see her again, that she would forget me." Her voice broke, but she continued. "When I saw the article in the newspaper and saw my sister smiling, I realized she was okay. And when I met Mr. Robert, I saw that he truly loved her, not like someone who wants to use her or show off or gain something in return. He loves her like I love her." like a father loves a daughter. The judge leaned forward. And what about your adoptive family, Isabella? They have also proposed adopting Sophia. Wouldn't you like to live with your sister in their house? Isabella looked at the Caldwells and then back at the judge. No, ma'am, because they don't want Sophia. They just want to control me. They never cared about her before, only now when they saw they could use her against Mr. Robert. A murmur went through the room. The Caldwells' lawyer stood up, protesting. That is an unfounded accusation. My clients have the best intentions. Paul stood up as well. They are not unfounded, Your Honor. We have proof that the Caldwell family is being financed and guided by Mr. Robert Miller's cousins, who have already once tried and failed to have him declared incompetent. This is a new attempt to harm him, using the children as instruments. The judge banged her gavel. Order! What proof is this? Paul presented the emails Mark had obtained. Messages between Gregory Miller and the Caldwell's lawyer, discussing strategies to prevent the adoption, talking about financial compensation, coordinating testimonies. It was a clear and documented conspiracy. The room fell silent as the judge read the documents. When she finished, her face was stern. I see here a clear attempt to manipulate the judicial process. This is extremely serious. The Caldwell's lawyer tried to defend himself, but there was no possible defense. The evidence was irrefutable. The judge looked at the Caldwells. Your adoption petition is denied, and I will order an investigation into this conspiracy. The Caldwells turned pale, and then the judge looked at Robert. Mr. Miller, do you wish to say anything before I make my decision? Robert nodded and asked for permission to speak. The judge agreed. Robert positioned himself before her, the emotion clear in his voice. Your Honor, I lost my son 2 years ago. It was the worst pain I have ever felt in my life, and for a long time I thought I would never be able to feel joy, purpose, love again, until I met Sophia. That little girl, who had lost as much as I had, approached me in a cemetery and offered me something I didn't even know I needed, hope. Robert paused, wiping away tears. I don't want to replace her parents. I don't want her to forget where she came from. I just want to give her a chance at a happy, safe life full of love. And I want Isabella to be part of that. Because Sophia deserves to have her sister, and Isabella deserves to have her sister back. We can be a family, unconventional perhaps, but a real family. Based on love, on choice, on commitment. The judge was silent for a long moment, and then she said, I will call a 30-minute recess to deliberate. Those 30 minutes were the longest of Robert's life. He, Paul, Isabella, and the witnesses waited in the hallway, nervous and anxious. Sophia had been brought to the courthouse but was, in a separate room with a social worker, shielded from the tension of the hearing. When the judge returned, everyone went back to their seats. The room was in absolute silence. Judge Beatrice Nolan began to speak. This is a complex case, involving issues of love, loss, family, and justice. I have carefully analyzed all aspects. Mr. Robert Miller is a man who has suffered a profound tragedy, but has shown resilience and the capacity to love again. Isabella Smith is a courageous teenager who fought for her sister, even when it was difficult. And Sophia is a child who deserves to have a family that loves her unconditionally. The judge paused. Considering all factors, the evidence presented, the testimonies, and the best interest of the child, I have decided to grant custody of Sophia Marie Smith to Mr. Robert Miller. Robert felt the tears fall. Paul squeezed his shoulder, but the judge continued. However, with one condition. Custody will be granted with the obligation to maintain and encourage continuous and meaningful contact between Sophia and her sister Isabella. Mr. Miller must facilitate regular visits, including sleepovers and participation in important decisions about Sophia's life. Isabella will have the right to be present at important moments in her sister's life and to maintain a strong fraternal bond. The judge looked at Isabella. And as for you, Isabella, upon turning 18, you will have the right to petition for shared custody arrangements, should you wish. Until then, this court expects Mr. Miller to treat you as part of the family. Isabella began to cry, but they were tears of joy. The judge banged her gavel. Case closed. The room erupted in applause. Robert couldn't stop crying. Paul hugged him, Amanda hugged him, even people he didn't know came to congratulate him. But the person he most wanted to see was Sophia. He went to the room where she was, and when he opened the door he saw her anxious little face. "So, Uncle Robert, what happened?" Robert knelt down to her level, took her hands. "Sophia, do you want to come live with me? To be my daughter?" Sophia's eyes widened. "For real? Forever? Forever?" Sophia jumped into his arms, hugging him with all her might. "Yes, yes, yes." Isabella entered the room at that moment, and the three of them hugged. A family born not of blood but of choice and love. The following months were ones of adjustment and joy. Sophia moved into the mansion in Greenwich, which Robert had completely renovated. Her room was a dream, with walls painted a soft pink, shelves full of books, a desk for drawing, and a large window overlooking the garden. Robert hired a tutor to help with her studies, a therapist to help with the adjustment, and ensured Sophia had everything she needed. But more than material things, he gave her time, attention, love. They had dinner together every night, talking about their day. On weekends, they went on outings, to the movies, to the park, and Isabella was always present. She spent every weekend at the mansion, sleeping in the room next to Sophia's. Gradually, the Caldwells accepted the situation, especially after Robert, in a gesture of generosity, offered to pay for Isabella's college when she turned 18. Robert also fulfilled another promise. He created the Liam Miller Foundation in honor of his late son, with the goal of helping orphaned children and renovating orphanages. The first institution to benefit was the one in Soho, which, after Marcia's removal, was completely restructured. Robert personally took over its management, hired a new honest director, renovated the entire building, and created educational and psychological support programs. The orphanage became a national model for how to properly care for vulnerable children. Marcia and Miss Vera were convicted of embezzlement and corruption, receiving prison sentences and being forced to return the stolen money. Gregory and Renee also faced consequences, being investigated for attempted procedural fraud. Oliver Fitzgerald, the lawyer who had conspired with them, was disbarred. Life had meaning again for Robert. Not that the pain of losing Liam had disappeared. It never would. But now there was room for other emotions, for joy, hope, love. Sophia had filled a void he thought was impossible to fill. A year after the adoption, on a rainy Friday in May, Robert did something he hadn't done in months. He went to visit Liam's grave. But this time, he wasn't alone. Sophia was with him, holding his hand. Isabella was there too, on the other side. They walked in silence to the mausoleum. Sophia carried a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, Liam's favorite flowers. When they arrived, she placed the flowers in the vase carefully and stood there looking at the headstone. "This is your brother," Robert said, softly. "Liam. He was very special." Sophia touched the headstone with her small hand. "He was your son too." "He was, and he would have loved to meet you." Sophia was silent for a moment and then looked at Robert. "Can I call you Daddy now?" Robert's heart stopped. For that whole year, Sophia had continued to call him Uncle Robert. He had never forced it, never asked. But now, there, in front of Liam's grave, she was asking that question. "Of course you can, sweetie. I would love that." Sophia smiled, that luminous smile that had the power to light up even the darkest days. "Okay then, Daddy." Robert hugged her, crying. Isabella came closer and they stood there, the three of them, united. An unusual family, born from pain, but forged in love. As they left the cemetery, Sophia looked back one last time. "Bye, Liam, thanks for lending me your daddy." Robert smiled through his tears. "He didn't lend him, Sophia. He sent you to me, to save each other." And as the van drove away from the cemetery, Robert looked out the window and saw the sun beginning to peek through the clouds. After so long, living in darkness, there was finally light. A light that had the smile of an 8-year-old girl and the unconditional love of 2 sisters who had become his daughters. The pain of the past had not disappeared, but it had been transformed. transformed into something beautiful, something that mattered, something that saved lives. Liam would have been proud, and Robert, for the first time since the accident, felt he was honoring his son's memory in the best way possible, by living, by loving, by being a father again. The circle had closed. Death had given way to life. Loneliness had given way to family. And a man who thought he had lost everything had discovered that he could still gain the whole world in the form of two little girls who had chosen to love him as much as he loved them. The mansion in Greenwich, once a silent mausoleum, now echoed with laughter, music, lively conversations. The walls had Sophia's drawings taped up. The refrigerator was covered in magnets with family photos. The garden had a swing set Robert had installed. It was life. It was joy. It was love. And every Friday, without fail, Robert, Sophia, and Isabella went to the cemetery. They brought flowers, talked to Liam, shared the news of the week. But it was no longer a place of pure sadness. It was a place of connection, of gratitude, of honored memory. Sophia would grow up in that house full of love, with a father who would do anything for her, and a sister who would never again allow them to be separated. Isabella would gain her independence at 18 and choose to remain a part of that unconventional but profoundly true family. And Robert, the businessman who had everything and lost everything, had discovered that the greatest wealth was not in banks, in companies, in mansions. It was there in the laughter of a once orphaned child, in the hug of a teenager who had found her sister again, in the purpose of making a difference in the lives of other children through the foundation. Life had given him a second chance, and Robert had seized every second of it. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Sophia, and Isabella has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of pain transformed into love, of loneliness transformed into family, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it the encounter at the cemetery, the fight for adoption, the reunion of the sisters, or the emotional ending? Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest and most resilient side of the human soul, showing that even in the greatest tragedies, love and hope can flourish. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another narrative that will stir your emotions and make you believe in the transformative power of true love.